Welcome to the Alain Elkann interviews, an unprecedented window into the minds of some of the most well-known and respected figures of the last 25 years.
This morning we are in the offices of the Pinault collection that is close to the La Bourse de Commerce, which is the new museum, the new venture that Mr. François Pinault has inaugurated a few months ago. And we are here with Martin Bethenod, who is similar to our interviews in the sense that he is a very eclectic person in the world of arts. He has been many different things in his career. He has been director of the FIAC for many years. He has been working at the Centre Georges Pompidou for many years. He has been the editor of Connaissance des Arts for some years and Vogue magazine. And for many years, he was the director of Palazzo Grassi and further the Punta della Dogana, which are the two museums of François Pinault in Venice. And obviously, he has been working close to Monsieur Pinault in the building of this new venture, La Bourse du Commerce. And he has accepted to be for a few months the director, the president of this new museum. And he will be succeeded later in the autumn by Emma Lavigne, who is coming from the Palais de Tokyo to become the director of La Bourse de Commerce. And Martin, after such a long and eclectic career, will go back to work in some state institution. So his life is a little bit in the state cultural institutions. He also worked at the Ministry of Culture and in private institutions like La Bourse de Commerce. Good morning, Martin. So can you tell me a little bit what happened in these years in the Pinault world and how come Monsieur Pinault decided to transform this building, La Bourse de Commerce, into a museum that is home for a large part of his collection, and that was done, obviously, with the help of a great architect, Japanese architect Tadao Ando, who built the inside of the museum.
So thank you. Hello. Pinault Collection starts as a project of a collection. I mean, purchasing and collecting art since more or less 50 years. And it turned itself into a museum project in the early 2000s. As it may sometimes happen, it started with not a failure, but with something that couldn't be achieved. Was a big project near Paris in the Ile-Seguin in Boulogne-Billancourt in the early 2000s, the project to build a big museum with a Tadao Ando. For some mostly bureaucratic problem, it was not possible to build this big museum in Paris. And at this moment, we are here in 2005, 2006, François Pinault has some kind of a visionary idea to drop the idea of a big flagship museum, as we could say, to not to be in the typology or the ideal of the Guggenheim Bilbao or big museums like this, but more to imagine a kind of network of archipelago of smaller museums that would be all small-scaled, human-scaled, and built not in one city, but in several cities in Europe. It started with the fantastic opportunity in 2006 to take over, I would say, the Palazzo Grassi that was in Venice completely beautifully restored and ready for big exhibitions as it had been in the decade by Fiat, and to turn it into a museum of contemporary art. And Palazzo Grassi is a fantastic venue, and Venice is a fantastic platform for international visibility of contemporary art. But it's human scale, so it's fantastic, it's pleasant, it's marvelous to visit, but it's not that big. And we know contemporary art, very often, works are very big, and they need a lot of space all around for classic art, you can have 10 paintings on one wall. For contemporary art, this is not possible. Each work needs a big space all around just to dialogue with the space and to the visual and sensible experience for the visitor. So after Palazzo Grassi, he started a second museum in Venice, Punta della Dogana, restored by Tadao Ando. And then it was in 2009. And then at the same time started what we call the program of exhibitions hors les murs, to more events done in and together with the biggest museums in the world, but on a more temporary basis. It's been in Germany, in Russia, in France. And 2013, an auditorium next to Palazzo Grassi, the Teatrino, also designed by Tadao Ando. And since the beginning, there was the idea not to come back to Paris, because to come back to Paris would have meant leaving Venice, and it's not the project, but to imagine a new project in Paris. And during almost 10 years, very often proposals were made to Monsieur Pinault by the Ministry of Culture, by the city of Paris, of would you consider this building or this one? And in the end of 2015, François Pinault found the right moment and the right place.
And how did he find it?
He found because at the moment, the new elected mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, had the possibility to propose the Bourse de Commerce.
What was the Bourse de Commerce?
The Bourse de Commerce is in the very center of Paris. It's the former Commodity Stock Exchange. It's not Bourse Palais Brongniart, where people just exchange shares of societies, but the place where, since the 19th century, was the trade, the sugar, the coffee, corn.
And then now it was not anymore in use.
It was used as offices for the Chambre de Commerce, Camera di Commercio, but of course, obviously, the building is too big and not very adapted to the use of offices. And so the municipality of Paris dreamt at the same time of having a new contemporary space with the prestigious Collection Pinault in the center of Paris, and find to this building a new use, a new destination. So this was the right place because it's the very center of Paris. It's a beautiful historical building, at the same time very iconic because it's a circular shape, and at the same time very not well known at all because Parisians and people didn't know it. So it's a nice, right place. And it was also the right time because we are here at the very end of 2015, beginning of 2016. It's the moments, it was the terrorist attacks in Paris, and François Pinault felt it was the right moment to have a very strong gesture towards his city, towards his country, towards Paris, and make a positive and optimistic gesture.
And also he was, the COVID-19 is not finished, but you open more or less at the end of the lockdowns, right? And
yes.
Was it possible to work during the COVID-19 time, or
well,
had to stop?
We've been at the same time very strongly impacted by the COVID. I mean, our opening should have been in springtime 2020. And in March 2020, the big lockdown, the big pandemics forced us just to stop everything and to stop completely the works and the renovation, to postpone all the projects. And during the end of 2020 and beginning of 2021, it was a very complicated period because we just didn't know when it would be possible to finally open. But our idea was very strong that we didn't know when it would be possible. We needed to be the first ones to open. And just to be part of and to be a symbol of this new renaissance of the cultural possibilities. And so in the 1st of May or the 2nd of May, Emmanuel Macron announced that museums would reopen the 19th of May, so 2 weeks after, and we opened the 19th of May at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Fantastic. And how does it function? What is the layout of the museum, and what part of the collection is in the museum, and if it is a permanent collection or if Mr. Pinault will switch several work, change?
Let's start with the building itself. It's around 10,000 square meters. We divided it into, there are 10 different galleries. Some of them big, some of them small, some of them very big because part of contemporary art is very monumental, but some of them also very intimate because it's not because some parts of contemporary art are monumental that contemporary art is generally monumental. So we also have a much smaller, more raccolte galleries to have photographs or more intimate works, so 10 spaces. And the idea is to make them work sometimes simultaneously and sometimes one after the other in order to never close. We open the 19th of May with all the spaces open simultaneously. And once it's open, it will never close completely, because when one gallery will be in installation, the other is open, and just to start a kind of permanent movement, permanent dynamics that is quite important in the philosophy of the collection.
How does it work to start to keep talking about the physical museum, right? The Bourse du Commerce is a round building, right? Like a church, like a
Pantheon.
Like a pantheon. And Tadao Ando had to deal with the round space, right? We know a very famous museum, which is the Guggenheim, who has this round shape. How does it work for showing painting or showing works of art?
It's challenging and magic. Bourse du Commerce, as you said, is a circular building with a very big hall under a glass cupola at 35 meters high with the sky of Paris above. So this building is a big circle. In the center, this big hall under the cupola, and all around, circular galleries. As you said, some very famous museums are circular or round, like Guggenheim, but we also can think of the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, and some others. In Paris, you have Palais de Tokyo or Musée d'Art Moderne or even Grand Palais with very curved galleries. Curved galleries are challenging, but when it works, it gives to the artworks fantastic dynamics. It's one of the points of the museums of Pinault collection to be always very specific. I mean, the spaces are never the classic orthogonal white cube that would speak about the autonomy of the contemporary artwork. They are always places and spaces with specificities. In Venice, in Punta della Dogana, you have these low ceilings, you have the bricks, you have the beams, you have the light and the windows coming all around. And when Punta della Dogana started, a lot of people said, well, it's very beautiful, but it's impossible to show art inside. And our credo is that it's not only possible to show art, but when you show art in such context, you show them in some kind of unforgettable way, and you propose to the viewer and to the spectator at the same time artwork and the experience of the relationship of this artwork with the context. In Bourse du Commerce, it's exactly the same. It's not the beams and the bricks as in Punta della Dogana, but it's a very strong decor of the 19th century. It's these curved walls, these windows that we kept all open to the context and to the city. And this is very important because it's a kind of philosophic reaction to the idea of the standardization of the exhibition spaces. The ideal exhibition space is a white cube. That when you have a white cube, you can be in a gallery in New York, you can be in a museum in Paris, in
instead you want to be in the context, right? But and also it looks like if there was a great not only admiration but understanding between Tadao Ando and Monsieur Pinault, no? There is something that he appreciates particularly, the simplicity of...
the radicality, the idea of the minimal act. Pinault collection started a lot in the 70s and 80s with artworks from the minimal art movement or abstraction, American minimalist paintings. Sculptors are Donald Judd or Dan Flavin or Carl André. So this idea of minimal is very, very present. Also, the importance of works of the 70s or 80s of Arte Povera. I mean, this idea that everything that is necessary is here, and everything that is not necessary is not here and doesn't have to be here. And at the same time, it's aesthetic correspondence between the two men. But what is also very important, it's the idea of the long-term relationship. Tadao Ando and François Pinault, it's a relationship that grows since 20 years. It started with the unrealized project of Boulogne, and then Palazzo Grassi, the small restyling, and then Punta della Dogana, the complete restoration, and then Teatrino, the possibility to build the contemporary space in the city of Venice, and then Bourse de Commerce. So can you imagine the relationship between two men? What is funny is Monsieur Pinault doesn't speak Japanese and Tadao Ando doesn't speak French, and both of them understand each other, and they together have a kind of companionship on 20 years, 5 projects, 2 cities. And when François Pinault decided to open the Bourse de Commerce, well, he didn't say, well, who are we going to call? Who would be the best architect? Who is the architect of the moment with the star architect? No, it's just a call Tadao Ando. And it works like this. And this is important because the relationship with the art and the artworks and the artists work the same way. As you can see in Bourse de Commerce, or at the same time, same thing in Venice, Pinault collection is not the idea of a sampling or...
How many pieces is
more than 10,000.
The whole collection?
Yes.
And pieces will move from Paris to Venice, from Venice to Paris?
And everywhere.
They will?
Yes, they do. And they already do, because the idea is we never show a permanent collection. There are not rooms dedicated to permanent collections. Of all the rooms, all the galleries of Venice and of Paris are dedicated to the collection, to the works that belong to the collection, to projects with artists that are very strongly related to collection, but at the same time, it's never shown on an ontologic basis. We never show the masterpieces from the Pinault collection. We always show works on the basis of a project. And the collection is always shown in an edited way. It's always in a certain context for a certain project. So the works can be shown in Venice in the project and in Paris in another one.
When you visit Palazzo Grassi or Punta della Dogana in Venice, or when you visit La Bourse du Commerce, if you visit it in June and then you visit it in December, it may be 2 different museums.
Exactly.
So there is
you cannot fix the point of view on contemporary art and on creation. This point of view has to be dynamic, has to be never taken for granted, has to be always re-challenged.
Yeah, but like in any other collection in the world or museum, there must be some interesting pieces, but also some iconic pieces in a collection, right? That now that they are here or in Paris or in Venice, which are the iconic pieces of Pinault? I mean, each museum has some particular things, right?
Of course.
Now
I can name few.
In Paris, you have the Palais de Tokyo, you have the Georges Pompidou Center, the LVMH Museum, and so on. So there are several contemporary modern art museums.
Please let me point the fact that Palais de Tokyo doesn't have a collection.
Right.
That Louis Vuitton Foundation never shows permanently the collection. They show exhibitions like Morozov, etc., or shows from the collections, but always on a dynamic point of view. That the permanent collection of Pompidou is shown for the modern part, I mean, till the 40s or 50s, on quite slow, for long-term presentations, but the contemporary section of Pompidou changes more or less every year. So I mean the dynamics, this idea of dynamics is really important for contemporary art. But you were speaking of iconic works. Some of them are, and it's very interesting to show them not blocked in a chapel forever. Well, maybe one day, but here the project is really in the idea of dynamics and movements. I will take an example of one of the icons of the collection. Is a huge group of paintings by Sigmar Polke called Axial Age. It's 9 huge paintings, maybe the masterpiece of Polke. It's been shown in the Venice Biennale first in the Giardini, but then it was shown in Punta della Dogana, in the biggest nave of Punta della Dogana, in the entrance at the opening of Punta della Dogana, and then not. And then in 2016, when we did the big Polke retrospective in Palazzo Grassi, we installed them in an architectural project curated by Annabelle Seldorf in the atrium of Palazzo Grassi. And then nowadays, do you know where they are? They're in the Palais de Tokyo, and they're the most important piece that the artist Anne Himoff wanted in her show in Palais de Tokyo. So, I mean, these big works, these icons of the contemporary art.
In Palais de Tokyo, they are here.
In Palais de Tokyo.
But they belong to Pinault.
Yes. This is very important.
Why they are not at the Bourse de Commerce?
Because we have already shown them in different, and they didn't fit in the project, and they are here to be shown always in meaningful projects.
And what would you recommend in the Bourse de Commerce at the moment, now in this first year of life? What are the major things to be visited?
Yes, the building itself, because this relationship between the architectural creation of Tadao Ando as a tool to discover Parisian architecture of the 19th century, the huge Urs Fischer installation in the Rotonda as a kind of evocation, and
this
I would
is
say...
a self-portrait of Urs Fischer.
No, he's not inside. No? He's not inside. You will see it's a kind of, it's a group of sculptures. The biggest is 8 meters high, and it's a replica of the John Bologna abduction of the Sabine women that is in Florence, and with other objects that was lightened the first day of the exhibition, and at this moment it was perfect, it was beautiful, it was finished, it was vertical. And now it's melting, and the last day of the exhibitions, everything will have vanished and disappeared. I would also recommend, because it's major, and it's still linked with this idea of the long-term relationship between François Pinault and the artists, the ensemble of works by David Hammons that we show. It's 30 works by David Hammons. David Hammons, he's the most important African-American artist and the most also influential about these post-colonial and racial issues of art. He's never been shown in France. He's never been shown in Europe. And here, as it's François Pinault is collecting his works and built a strong relationship with him since the 80s, we can show the works of David Hammons in the collection, and it's just like the biggest retrospective of Hammons that you can see. And it's also what we can do, and what Pinault Collection can do, is present to the French audience and to the European audience not only more, but something different. Works and artists that the institutions, the public institutions, the museum, for different reasons, never could present in France.
There is also a library inside the Pinault?
No, there is no library. There are educational programs, but in workshops. And there is a very intense cultural program in the auditorium with lectures, with conferences, with concerts, with performances. But no, there is no library. In Paris, the density of libraries dedicated to contemporary art made it not priority to have another one here in the Bourse de Commerce. Yes. You have the Pompidou, you have the Musée d'Art Moderne, you have so many...
Bibliothèque Nationale and many others. Mm-hmm. And are there many visitors coming?
Yes. Well, our bet was to be part of this moment of renaissance and of new start of cultural activities after COVID, and it worked. And despite the regulations, the obligation to pre-book slots at this moment, the fact that we can have less visitors than normally, the fact that they have to have the green pass, that we don't have the Americans, etc. Despite all of these problems, we are on the base of 3,000 visitors a day. And even if we don't have the tourists, non-European tourists, the success to a French audience and continental Europe audience makes it a very big success. Detail, but it's not a detail. We also started, membership, like people getting a card for 1 year. And since May till now, we already had 18,000 people who just
became
members. It means, it's fantastic.
How much costs the membership?
It's 35 for one, and you can have a double for you and a guest. That can be every time a new guest at 60 for 1 year. We just fix it exactly on the kind of rates and prices, the others. But it's fantastic because it shows a desire to commit of the people to commit towards our proposal. But it's also a big pressure because when people are members, it means that you have to keep on and to keep and I'm sure it will be.
You were director in Venice for many years, both institutions. Now there is Bruno Racine, a new director in Venice. Why there is not one director for the whole system?
Well, there is. At this moment, it's Jean-Jacques Ayagon, who is... yes. And Bruno and myself are, let's say, coordinated by Jean-Jacques, who has the responsibility on Venice, Paris, and the collection itself. And so between 2016 and 2020, I was director of, at the same time, Venice and the project of Bourse de Commerce until it opened. And when Bourse de Commerce was supposed to open in springtime 2020, well, a museum, especially a new one, needs someone to be here not every day, but almost every day, to embody the institution. And just 3 months before the opening of Bourse de Commerce, that was supposed to be in June, I quitted Venice and Bruno came because it was not reasonable to imagine to open a new museum of Paris without a figure that would be permanently here.
What I would like to know is in Venice, for instance, a few years ago, in the two institutions, and obviously you were there was a big Damien Hirst show, which was not made of the Pinault collections, right? It was like a show.
It depends of what you call...
some things belong to Pinault, others
yes.
don't. What are you going to do at the Bourse de Commerce? Are you going to show only the different pieces of the Pinault collection and then change them according to a program? Or are you also going to make major exhibitions of some artists?
Both. The programmation of Venice and the programmation in Paris, the program will be exactly the same. It's all about the collection, but you have two different ways to consider a collection and to work with it. The first is the classical one. Collection is a group of artworks, and we show these artworks belonging to the collection in curated shows with a theme or an idea, etc. It's what we do.
Emphasizing on one artist
or one movement or one theme, and then you can ask a curator to do it. And we did quite often. You can ask an artist also to do himself this job of curating works that are not his works. We did it with Jan Vaux or with Thomas Auseago in shows in which we invite an artist just to look at the collection and to present it. But you also can imagine that the collection is also not only a group of objects, but also a group of relationships with artists. And when we did Rudolf Stingel in Palazzo Grassi, that you may remember, when we do in this moment in Punta de Dogana the major Bruce Nauman exhibition, or when we did Luc Tuymans, or when we did Damien Hirst, it was projects with these artists that are so strongly related to the collection, and the proposal to the idea to propose to these artists space and time to develop one project. And at this moment, the relevant point is not if the works belong to the collection, because the strong point is the relationship with the artist. And to answer your question, after this group show of works from the collection, even when it's group shows from the collection, there is always a small exception because there is always a commission or a new project or a new production or an artist saying, I would love that this work that is in collection would dialogue with this other that is not. And so, it's a 85% collection and 15 out of this. And the other is this artist project for Naumann. I think there are 4 works in the collection on 20 works of the exhibition in Venice. And after this group show of works from the collection, the next big project will be Charles Ray, with a show of Charles Ray that is a major artist in the collection since more than 30 years. But we will show Charles Ray not only works from the collection, also loan loans from
This will be in
San
Venice.
Francisco Museum. No, this will be in Bourse de Commerce.
In
This
Bourse
will
de
be the
Commerce.
next show in Bourse de Commerce in,
So it will be the
in February.
The first show.
No, the first show is the show we show together. Everything is shows. There is no permanent collection and special exhibition. Even when we show works from the permanent collection, we show it in the purpose of a project. It's
What I mean now, you told me that in the hall you have this major work of Urs Fischer.
Yeah.
I remember Damien Hirst, huge
giant.
giant in the middle of Palazzo Grassi, in the hall of Palazzo Grassi. I don't know if it belongs or doesn't belong to the collection, but this was a big statement inside the palazzo. So people were going to mostly to see that, right? And the permanent collection or something like that. So is it going to be the same in...
Well, it would be a big mistake to reduce the projects and the exhibitions and the collection and the spaces to the spectacular things. Because every time we make one spectacular gesture, it's a project, but it's of course the one we remember, but it's in fact the exception. I mean, we remember the huge Damien Hirst giant, but maybe we don't remember the fact that we showed 10 times more minimal paintings or very discrete installations. What is kind of interesting in Bourse de Commerce is that we have two, not icons, but the most photographed and appreciated and Instagrammed works, the biggest and the smallest. The biggest is the Urs Fischer installation I was just mentioning. The smallest is a small animated mouse by the English artist Ryan Gander. And of course, you have the big things, but let's not focus only on them because they're always this idea of diversity and balance. I imagine that Charles Ray's approach of the big rotunda will be very different of the one by Urs Fischer and maybe looking for the not monumentality but disproportion between smaller works and the immensity of the space. You will see.
As you had experience of Venice and you have experience of Paris, we could say that these two cities are somehow the two most important cultural centers in Europe today. I mean, Venice is like a museum city, right, in a way. And it looks like if Paris, after this moment of silence in this reopening, with the fact that they will reshape the Centre Pompidou, that you have this new museum, and there are plenty of other spaces and even older museums like the Jacques Marandré. There are really cities where people come to see art.
Yes.
Not only the city in itself, like they visit Florence or Rome, but they come to see new museums, exhibitions. So you think that there is a renaissance in Paris, in Venice of...
Venice, it's really, really interesting. The fact that it's at the same time several cities united in one city, and it's fascinating the way that in Venice at the same time you have people who just completely ignore themselves, and you have the grand public who comes for the city and for the quick tourism, and you have the people and the community of art who comes from, and it's incredible the way they coexist in this very special setting. Venice is a platform, is an incredibly international platform of points of view. It started, the Biennale has a huge role, of course, of this, but I was very struck by the density and the dynamics of the community of private, public, university institutions, also Biennale market actors. And it's really a place where that gathers all of these protagonists of the art scene.
Or foreign people are opening foundations in Venice. No?
Yes.
Like
many.
Anish Kapoor or the Berggruen family or others.
Yes, the Berggruen, but Landau with the Stanze del Vetro, but Michelson with the VAC Foundation. Well, there are so many of them. And this is quite incredible. But what is important is the fact that it's not monolithic. You have at the same time public institutions at the same time private foundations, at the same time a university, and maybe 2 universities with also the UAV. And the fact that I think that sustainable art scenes are the art scenes that are not monolithic. There are some places in the world. Paris has been this for a moment, and it's not, and it's why it's so dynamic. That was only institutional museums, etc. But there was no market, but there was no and to be sustainable, you have, of course, places in Asia or in the Middle East that are only based on the market and the private, and none of them is sustainable. To be sustainable and to be really influential, an art scene, city or country, has to be at the same time private, public, non-profit, market, university, critics, and it has to be a little bit of all this. And Venice can be, and Paris is in a very, well, it's something that really interested me a lot when I was directing FIAC, and you know, between art fairs, there is a very strong competition of, at the same time, soft power, because an art fair is never only a question of market, it's also a question of soft power. And the competition in Europe has always been, and there is always a kind of moment of balance between Paris and London, mostly. Yes, but I think in this moment, Paris is really very dynamic, and it's fantastic.
Thank you very much, Martin Bethenod, for this conversation. And good luck for your new ventures, and thank you for having been with us.
Alain Elkann interviews.